Dígwyd the cara conasatatu. Fáilte isteach go Bitesize Irish. Welcome in. I'm Owen from Bitesize Irish, and today I want to talk about moving from being a learner of Gaeilge, of the Irish language, to being a speaker of the Irish language. Let's go. Araigling. So I have a huge respect for anyone who's diving into Gaeilge, and if you consider yourself a learner of the Irish language, fantastic, and stick around because this might help you. For me, it's about mindset. I spoke with Gabrielle, who was working at Bitesize Irish, on our podcast, and we had a show about yoga Gaeilge agus Gaeilge Gaeilge, because at Bitesize Irish our motto is Gaeilge Gaeilge, Irish every day. And Gabrielle saw a connection between this and yoga. She's a yoga teacher and a school teacher as well. Fantastic Irish teacher. And she made the connection that in yoga you're deemed a practitioner, right? A yogi. You're practicing yoga every day. It's part of your everyday life. That's not a judgment necessarily of how good you are. So you're breaking away these concepts of how good am I at something and how often do I do it, or how much do I integrate it into my everyday life. So at Bitesize Irish we say Gaeilge Gaeilge because for us that's a foundation. If you want to flip it the other way around, how do you not learn a language? You just don't make it part of your daily life at all. You make sure that you never get exposed to that language, right? So let's flip that back. How do you learn a language? There's a question, there's an element of immersion there. You're making it part of your everyday. Gaeilge Gaeilge. So it's not necessarily, you're not studying all the time. It's actually more of an identity thing. You're bringing the Irish language into your daily life and making it part of your life. And it doesn't matter if you're coming back to Irish, if you're a relearner, that you did it in school and maybe you wish you did a bit more in school, but now you have that graw for the language. Or there's plenty of people watching this outside of Ireland too, that you've never done the Irish language at school, but you've got this real curiosity as well, that the language speaks to you in some way. It's connecting you with something a bit deeper. So it doesn't matter what your personal situation is or where you are, or indeed even the people around you, because we'll get to that. You can make connections with the language with other people later on, but whatever your situation, you can still make the Irish language part of your everyday life. I'm quite taken by this book, Mastery, by Robert Greene. He delves deeply into skills acquisition essentially, but it's a very democratic view of the process. He essentially talks about trusting the process, trust yourself, trust your innate curiosity and dive into it. Don't hold yourself back because of the skills that you think you don't have maybe. So it's democratic because Robert Greene in the book is saying, you know, it doesn't matter how good or bad you are, but be a practitioner. And he emphasizes this point, and he even covers language learning. The book is not about language learning, but he mentions or covers language learning. In that you're not just a learner, you're moving from being a learner to being a practitioner. And again, this is different to how good you are at speaking as Gaeilge. It doesn't actually matter. It's really more the enthusiasm you bring to it. So if you're a practitioner for long enough, is what Robert argues. If you're a practitioner for long enough, you'll ultimately become an intuitive, in our case, speaker of the Irish language. And that's how we see it at Bitesize Irish. You're moving from, you're not just a learner, you're giving yourself permission to call yourself a practitioner, and ultimately, if you keep that up long enough and trust yourself enough, you will become a speaker of the Irish language. Now there's the question of labels here. Like, would you tell somebody, oh yeah, I'm a practitioner of Gaeilge? No, but maybe you can put your own words on it. Maybe there isn't a direct label, but you could tell people, yeah, the Irish language is part of my life. It's part of who I am. It's part of my identity. And I am practicing it in my life. Like in Irish we have the label Gaeilge, which is an easy label for somebody who speaks the Irish language, speaks Gaeilge. Now we could maybe stretch that term a bit to allow you to say, I'm a Gaeilge as Gaeilge me. If you're a practitioner, learner of the language, adult learner, diving deeply into the language. I don't know, I don't have an answer to that, but there's definitely a difference in mindset there. So in a past YouTube video, we had an interview with Jim. Aisling did the interview with Jim. And Jim spoke about his mindset, which is very interesting because he's quite a new learner. He's relatively new to the Irish language, I think, in digging deep into the language. He's never been to Ireland, but his spoken Irish, when he's reading it aloud, it's quite impressive. So for me it's interesting to understand the mindset of people who can achieve something like that. And Jim spoke about in the interview about he's reacquiring the language. He's seeing it as something that's lost. It was within him, he lost it, and he's now reacquiring it. That's his way of looking at it. He sees his daily life as being a Gaeltacht. He went so far as to say he sees the Irish language as the first language in his life, and everything else is secondary, even though he grew up speaking English. So that's a mindset. I can see with Jim that he sees himself as a practitioner of Gaeilge Gach Law, and I can see the success that he's getting from that process. So it's real. It's taking this mindset and moving towards action. This is real. It's not a theory that might help you. You will, by being a practitioner of Gaeilge, you will become a speaker. And it doesn't really matter to me what level speaker are we talking about. I don't care if in 5 years' time you're still feeling like beating yourself up a bit and saying, geez, I should be able to speak more Gaeilge now than I can. But I think the important thing is trusting yourself and diving into the process and keeping with it. So to go back to that book, Mastery by Robert Greene again, Robert breaks the process down into a few steps, and my interpretation of it for Irish language learners is that you're on a journey. That's essentially the metaphor we have at Bitesize Irish. You're on an Irish language journey, and it's a lifelong journey, really. There's no getting away from that. It's a lifelong journey. Once you're on the journey, and I assume you are because you're watching this, you're an Irish language learner at least, if not Gaeilge or at whatever level, even a native speaker. Úntach fáilte seachas gur mágad as a bheith féchant seo as a bheith géisteacht. But Robert lays out a couple of steps when you're on the journey. The first, after you've taken like the mindset change to be on the journey, is to study with intensity. And it doesn't mean studying alone, but it means diving into the topic deeply. And the intensity is interesting because he says the more intensity you bring into this phase of the process, the more output you'll see afterwards. So the more intensely you study now, the better the results for you later on in speaking Gaeilge. So you can do this by studying a textbook. At Bitesize Irish, we've got online courses where we've picked out the fundamental patterns that we want you to learn if you're an Irish language learner. And that's if you're coming back to it from school, maybe you do have more Irish in that case than you might realise. But it's still good to come back to the fundamentals and ensure what do you know, or maybe what you don't know yet. Or if you're fresh to the language, indeed, studying with intensity like that is ideal. And then you're maybe more prepared to practice the social element of a language, because a language does not exist on its own. A language exists for connecting with people. A language exists for expressing yourself to others and making that connection. So at Bitesize Irish, we do encourage you to practice spoken conversation in a scripted format with our bite-sized bio service, but anyway, that's kind of besides the point. The point really is that once you have the fundamentals, you can start putting that to use and try to have some simple conversations with people. If you've got a local class, Irish language class, fantastic. There's online services, you can coordinate your own. There's different ways of achieving this. And after you've started maybe expressing yourself a bit, let's say simplistically, who am I, what are my hobbies, you know, day-to-day life like that, you move to something more interesting, I think, ultimately, which is establishing an intuitive connection with Gaeilge, that you can come up with original thoughts and express yourself through the language, through Gaeilge. For me, that's like, I'm working towards that. I'm a native speaker of Gaeilge, but I can't necessarily express my best thoughts directly as Gaeilge, because sure, most of my life, stuff that I've been absorbing, it's through English language books and podcasts and television and everything like that. So I expose myself to Gaeilge as well. I am on the journey, and I'll always be on the journey, I think. It started when I was 0, and I'll keep going, you know. So if you can see yourself along that journey where you should study with intensity the fundamental rules and patterns of the language, start to then connect with others through the language, and later you're building up this intuitive sense of being able to use the language. And that's really when you're a verified Gaeilgeoir with no one can argue with you about that point. So that's the process, to go back to our original point, of moving from being a learner to being a practitioner to being a speaker. So if you get anything from this, I hope it's that you feel like maybe you, before watching this, you felt like, okay, I'm a learner of the Irish language. Maybe you can at least ask yourself, what would it look like if I was a practitioner of the Irish language? What would be different in my life if I was a practitioner of the language and didn't just see myself as a learner of the language? What would my life look like? How would it be more an integrated part of my everyday life? And I'll finish this by saying that at Bitesize Irish we have a taster, a free membership, where you can try out our online lessons. But part of that membership that you might be very interested in is our Gaeilge Gaeilge toolkit. And I love this resource that we have for taster members and all our Bitesize Irish members. It's a set of worksheets, maps as they call it, stuff you can work out on paper. We've got a Gaeilge Gaeilge checklist, a Gaeilge Gaeilge calendar, and it's something practical to guide you, to encourage you to make Irish part of your everyday life. So check out, I'll leave a link in the description of the video if you're interested. Sign up for our free taster membership, and in that membership you'll see your free course, Gaeilge Gaeilge Toolkit, and you'll be able to download and print out if you want those worksheets. So if you remember anything from today, Gaeilge Gaeilge. Slán!